Hey friends, welcome to this week's episode of Legally Armed America right here on Fox 29. It's with a very heavy heart that I come to you this week from the front door of Gator Guns, where this past week on Saturday we lost a very dear friend of mine. Richard Presutti, the owner of Gator Guns, passed away as a result of a massive heart attack. Most people that don't know Richard don't realize the impact that he had on this community, the gun community, and he touched so many people's lives. And what I'm going to do today is dedicate this whole episode of Legally Armed America on the legacy of Richard Presutti, my very good friend, and hope you guys enjoy it. Friends, I'm speaking to you today from Richard's office right here in Gator Guns. Everybody that knew Richard that I've talked to all had their special place that they remembered Richard, where they interacted with Richard at, whether it be a gun show, the gun range, concealed carry class, something of that nature. All those places I've dealt with Richard at, but this is probably the place that I will not only remember but miss the most when dealing with Richard. Richard and I would sit right here. This was Richard's chair and this was where I would sit. And we would solve all the problems of the world, man. We would talk about gun legislation. We would dissect bills and talk about, what was good, what was bad, what we needed to fight against. And I think both of us respected each other, where we would take what we learned and go, talk to our friends and, our followers out there that followed us online or on the television show. And we would sit back here if a new gun came out and we couldn't figure out how it worked or we didn't know. We'd sit here and tear it apart. We'd go next to the little door, next room over to the little gunsmith area and take guns apart, It was things that we did. We were both gun nerds. We loved this industry, this world. And, it was such an interesting thing to me. I would receive a text from Richard, call me when you can, or swing by, I want to tell you something. And I'd come by, or I'd shoot him a text, are you at the shop? And that's how we communicated. It was short and sweet on text, and then we would just show up and hash things out. This was an important place for me. And the thing about Richard was a lot of people that interacted with Richard did not realize how passionate Richard was about this industry. This was not something that Richard simply did to make money. Quite the opposite if you look at where Richard was when he started. When Richard ran his parts stores in Westlake, that's when Richard started into the gun business. And Richard would have an inventory of 6 guns. And that would be what he had to sell. That would be the money. That was how many guns he could afford to buy in order to sell. And he would take that small profit and reinvest it back into additional inventory. And by contrast, today Richard has upwards to 800 to 900 guns in inventory right here at Gator Guns all the time. So if that gives you an idea on the contrast from 6 guns to 900, pretty impressive if you ask me. But that's where Richard was smarter than a lot of the other people. He believed in inventory. I can remember the first time I met Richard 10 years or so ago at his little store on Verdine Street. I remember driving up and walking to that front door, and I remember in my head thinking, and this is how closed-minded I was, thinking there's no way there's any guns that I want inside this place. It just didn't look like it was going to house anything of any real value. And when I walked in there and saw the this was back when Kimber made good 1911s, the Kimber 1911s, the Colt 1911s, 6 Hour, the line of everything that they had, the Benelli shotguns lined up on the wall, Beretta, you name it. All the top names were there. And one thing I didn't notice, any of the cheap brands. Richard believed strongly in having the best of the best. He didn't want that other stuff. He didn't want the, quote, pawn shop guns. That's not what he was looking for. He didn't want that crowd in there. And boy, when I walked through that door and realized the quality of stuff he had, I was hooked. He had a customer for life from me. And I bought a gun here or there from other people, but I always went back to Gator Guns and Richard because Richard always treated everybody fairly. Now, I have to admit, early on, I grew up around guns my whole life. So most of us who grew up around guns but had no formal training of any kind, we kind of thought we knew it all. And we thought we'd seen it all. And there were questions that I probably asked Richard early on that were very stupid questions. Not probably, there were. I asked a lot of stupid questions of Richard. And Richard was probably a little short with me at first because I was a bit of a know-it-all. But over time, Richard realized that my desire to learn was there, and my interest in guns was definitely there. And Richard and I developed a very strong relationship through that. Richard taught me a lot. Richard gave me a lot of the knowledge that I have today, whether he realized that or not. And I don't think he was trying to teach me. I think we just developed a relationship where he had fun talking. He enjoyed talking about guns. And I don't think his intent was to give me knowledge, but I was picking up on everything that Richard was giving out. And, that was very important to me because Richard and I had almost 20 years between us. And we developed a very strong relationship between us in a very unique way. Richard and I would sneak off to lunch and grab a bite to eat, knowing I was busy and I knew he was busy. But we'd still go grab a bite to eat. Or we'd meet here in the office and, we'd do, tear the guns down. If there was a new gun coming out that neither one of us had seen or shot or felt or touched or broken down before, we would Google it. And we would look online at it and we would figure out, okay, this is what it is. And we'd talk about it. It was like anything that I wanted to bounce off of anybody was always Richard was the #1 first person that I ever spoke to about anything. Our gun bully segments that got extremely popular and actually introduced us to the Wyndham weaponry up in Wyndham, Maine. It's because of Richard. I wanted to beat up an AR-15. I wanted to see how much abuse it could take. I went to Richard and I was like, hey man, I know you know what's the best gun you feel like I could do this with. You know what Richard told me? Smith & Wesson Sport, M&P, or Wyndham Weaponry. And of course I thought, well, Wyndham Weaponry probably could use the exposure better than Smith & Wesson. Smith & Wesson wouldn't care. So I did that and it became extremely popular. That's because of Richard's input. That was the kind of input that I sought out from Richard that I got. That was very, very valuable to me, and I learned a lot from Richard through those means. Richard also was very good in the concealed carry community. Miss Donnie, his wife, had her own concealed carry courses. And Richard was an integral part in the classes and the training of these people out at the range whenever they were qualifying. And the one thing that I always recognized and respected about Richard was the fact that he recognized the different personalities that were coming to get their concealed carry weapons permits. He recognized that there were simply gun owners. He recognized that there were people that might be single moms, and he recognized people that might actually have had something negative happen in their life that now they needed that weapon on their side on a regular basis for actual personal protection. Richard didn't lump all those people into one category. He could spot those people, and whenever it came time to qualifying at the range, sometimes he would see a person that was very, very new to guns that might not be very safe around guns. If you're brand new to guns, sometimes you don't have that safety awareness of guns. And Richard could single that person out and pick them out without making them feel like they were singled out. In other words, he didn't make them feel like they were different or they were doing something stupid. He would quietly take them aside and make them feel special, but not different. And he could take those people and really train them and get them to the point when they left that class, they were doing really, really well, and they were safe with that firearm.
Hey, I'm Max Michelle. You're watching Legally Armed America on FOX29.
We train every day to be the best, and we depend on our gear to do the same. Because preparedness is only half the battle. That's why we rely on Drago gear to be ready for our mission.
Clear. Right. Contact left.
Drago gear, ready for your mission. Find Drago gear at your local Academy Sports and Outdoors store.
Whether hunting big game or guiding clients on the Hardtice Ranch, there are many variables that can make a hunt more challenging. But your ammo should never be one of them. That's why I depend on Armscore ammo.
Three months into my deployment into Afghanistan, my vehicle drove over an IED. Both me and my driver had our feet catastrophically injured. My wife, as strong as she'd been, she just couldn't be there anymore. Thankfully, everything did go wrong at the same time.
Oh, 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 Lord, I'm gonna make them see. Are you ready? Here it comes. Are you ready? Are you ready for me?
Richard also introduced me to USPSA. That's the United States Practical Shooting Association. That's the U.S. branch of the IPSC organization, which is worldwide, and that's practical shooting. You know, for such a long time, Richard tried to get me to go shoot USPSA with him, and I just really didn't want to because I was an older guy. I felt like people were going to make fun of me, and you know, these guys have been shooting for years, and I'm like, I really don't want to do that. Well, finally one year, whenever the weather was really nice, Richard convinced me to go. I said, all right, I'll go with you. And up to that, leading up to that, Richard had taken me to the range, and he had prepared me, taught me how to make, you know, faster draws, how to reload my magazines, really coached me up. That day that I rode with Richard at my first ever match, I remember how nervous I was, but at the same time, how sneaky I felt, because I felt like here's a new guy that's new to this sport, and everybody sees me as a brand new green rookie new guy, but I felt like I had an ace in the hole. I felt confident. You know, I had gone out with Richard enough to where I felt like these guys are not going to think that I'm brand new by the time the day is over with. And of course, I didn't shoot great. I think I was a little bit more overconfident. But my nerves quickly went away because people like Richard and everybody else there were so kind to me and so helpful to me. And, you know, Richard got me to being competitive so quickly. So quickly. And I owe that to Richard. And I also owe it to Richard that, you know, shooting that made me so much more aware of my surroundings. And when I felt like USPSA, when you shoot at that level, there's a certain amount of anxiety and nerves that you encounter that you will not encounter on a regular basis. And it's probably the closest you and I will ever get to entering a real world situation where we actually have to deploy our weapon. So I feel like I'm so much more prepared in the event, God forbid, that I ever have to draw my weapon. So that's a big blessing. That's a gift that Richard gave to me that had he not been persistent, because he knew I was going to like it. He knew it. He told me that I knew you were going to like this. But he was persistent, and he kept on. Not in an aggravating way. He didn't like badger me, but he kept after me until I finally gave in and decided to shoot with him. And that's one thing that I'll never forget. This next clip is actually a clip that I put together on USPSA, and I'm proud to say Richard is in it. And that's why I want to show this, because this was a passion of Richard. Richard was very good. He was, I think, a Class A shooter. I'm not sure if he was a Grandmaster, but I know for sure he was a Class A shooter. And he was very, very good. Even at Richard's age, Richard was very, very competitive. And I never beat Richard. Never. So I can tell you, I came in 2 places behind him on one stage one time, and I was like, yes! So anyway, this clip right here, of course, includes video of Richard in it, and I hope you guys will enjoy it. It describes a little bit about what USPSA is. And again, this was something that Richard was very passionate about for many, many years. I'm out here at the USPSA course here in Southeast Texas at the Orange Gun Club. We're going to catch these guys at the Southeast Texas Practical Shooters Club. Having a little bit of fun today. We're going to have a little bit of it ourselves. And check this out. We got some pretty cool video for you.
If you're a gun dude or a gun chick and you've never shot practical shooting, what the heck are you waiting on? This is some really good stuff. In a nutshell, practical shooting is a firearm sport that challenges the shooter to shoot quickly and accurately and maneuver within an array of targets in a particular stage. And at the end of the stage, your time on the stage and the accuracy of your hits are compiled together to give you your overall score on that particular stage that you just shot. The targets on each stage consist of a mixture of everything from cardboard targets that you shoot at to what's called a steel popper. Your job is to pretty much outsmart the stage setup. That can consist of several things, including moving quickly between targets, shooting some targets from positions that are less obvious than what the stage setup may suggest, but mostly just being efficient between your targets and getting to and from those targets as quickly as possible so that you have time to lay down a very accurate shot. Is this sport safe? You bet it is. Not only is safety pushed in practical shooting, but unsafe behavior is not tolerated. You will be disqualified due to unsafe actions on the range.
Stand by!
This sport's for everyone. Young people, old people, men, women. It doesn't matter what your skill set is, there's a place for you in this sport. One of the many skills that are needed to compete at a pretty high level in this sport is magazine changes. Many of these stages have mandatory magazine changes or necessary magazine changes because you basically run out of ammo. Check out this really cool slow motion magazine change by Alex Cassis from the Generation Practical Shooters in Houston, Texas. If you are a firearm fan, young or old, man or woman, this is a sport for you. This is a really cool sport, a fun sport, and look, the people are amazing people. Do not be intimidated if you are new to the sport because everybody at the range, whether they've been competing for years or they're new as well, will help you. Very cool people.
If you're finished, unload, show clear.
Did I mention this was a safe sport? And as you can see by this uncoordinated slug right here, you don't have to be good to have fun at this sport. I'm certainly not the greatest shot or the best practical shooter in the world, but I have a blast every Saturday that I get to do it, and every day on the range is a good day.
Hi, I'm Julie Golub, and you're watching Legally Armed America on Fox 29.
We train every day to be the best, and we depend on our gear to do the same. Because preparedness is only half the battle. That's why we rely on Drago gear to be ready for our mission.
Clear. Right. Contact left.
Drago gear, ready for your mission. Find Drago gear at your local Academy Sports and Outdoors store.
Whether hunting big game or guiding clients on the Hartice Ranch, there are many variables that can make a hunt more challenging. But your ammo should never be one of them. That's why I depend on Armscore ammo.
Three months into my deployment into Afghanistan, my vehicle drove over an IED. Both me and my driver had our feet catastrophically injured. My wife, as strong as she'd been, she just couldn't be there anymore. Thankfully, everything did go wrong at the same time.
Oh, 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 Lord, I'm gonna make them see. Are you ready? Here it comes. Are you ready? Are you ready for me?
Guys, one thing I got to tell you about Richard was probably his fairness. And this was why his business got to the point where it is now, where he was able to have the kind of inventory that he had. Richard was one of the biggest dealers of many of the firearm brands down here in Southwest Louisiana. Very large. All the distributors knew who Richard was, and they all wanted Richard's business. If Richard did not have something in inventory, which he usually did, that you wanted, within 2 days, Richard had it in from all the major distributors because they wanted to satisfy Richard. They got him whatever he needed fast, whether it was ammo or whether it was a specific gun that was hard to get. But one thing that Richard did to this community that I think a lot of people will always remember is the Obama administration was a good time for gun businesses. Richard got into the gun business when it was not a profitable business. Again, his 6 guns that he had at a time would roll over and buy additional guns. It was not like Richard was, you know, making money hand over fist back in the days. Richard fought when the business was not a strong, lucrative business. He just kept trudging along because he was passionate about it and it was his life. During the Obama administration is when the gun industry blew up. A lot of gun companies and a lot of people in the industry got into the industry because it was so lucrative during that 8-year span of the Obama administration. Richard was fortunate enough that he positioned himself to be ready for that. And that was one of Richard's probably biggest gifts, is that he could recognize peaks and valleys, trends in the industry, and know how to prepare for them, know when he needed to get more of this type of ammo, knew when this was going to be the new kind of ammo, and stop using that new special bullet that every year there's a new round that's the new special round. And Richard recognized which ones were good, which ones were bad, and he would prepare from an inventory standpoint for those things. He did the same thing with guns. And during the Obama administration, about the time Sandy Hook happened in 2012, Richard had positioned himself with a very, very strong amount of inventory and ammunition in his store. And I never will forget sitting back, and this is whenever I knew Richard, but we weren't like great friends, but I knew him, so I still looked at Richard from the outside looking in, even though I knew him. And I never will forget watching him when he had the opportunity to charge $2,000 for a $700 AR-15. Still charged $700 for that $700 AR-15. AR-15s that were complete and total junk were flying off the shelves and getting 3, 4, 5 times what they were literally worth on the street and in the store. They were selling. And people knew they were getting screwed, and they were still buying these guns. Not one time did Richard raise the price. Not one time did he raise the price on 5.56 ammo, which was flying off the shelf. Not one time did he raise the price of .22 ammo, which was like gold back then. They would get bricks of... I remember when they would get thousands of rounds of .22 ammo in. Well, during that craze, during Obama's administration, they would get like 5 bricks in at a time, where I remember them getting thousands and thousands of rounds. They would get 5 bricks. Richard sold those bricks for the same price as he does today, as he did during that gun craze, as he did before that. Because Richard was not trying to screw anybody or take advantage of anybody. Richard recognized that once that peak was done and it died out, this was going to settle back down and go back down to a valley again. And those people who you had taken advantage of and oversold or overpriced ammunition and guns for, they were going to remember. They were going to go back to wherever they were treated fairly. And I can honestly tell you, as God is my witness, I never once saw the price of anything in Richard's store be adjusted during all that crazy time. Richard could have probably become a millionaire during that time for the prices people were getting for some of the other items out of there. I remember seeing Richard selling hundreds of guns, hundreds, and thousands upon thousands of rounds of ammunition. Now Richard was smart because he knew still dealing in volume, he was still going to make very, very good money because he still had markup built into those products. It's just that now he was dealing in volume. So he's making his same markup, just selling tons of it. 10 times more than what he normally did. So he was still making very good money. He was not a greedy man. Again, he was a good man because he recognized that everybody else was going to be buying these things. And so many people, I remember driving to that place on Ferdinand Street, and I'd park on the street because there was no room in the parking lot. Because everybody recognized that about Richard, and they recognized the fairness that he was conducting himself in during all this crazy stuff. And he would ask you to be patient as he tried to get things out. You know, the FedEx truck would show up, and everybody just stood there drooling, what's in there, what's in the boxes? You know, Richard took his time, priced everything out accordingly, and John and Allison did, you know, price it out the same way. They can be my witness that Richard never tried to overcharge people for things that weren't worth more. Now, today, all those people that spent $2,000 on $700 AR-15s are still stuck with $700 AR-15s that they probably can't get $700 for. But anything that I bought from Richard during that time, I could at least get my money out of today or more. Because I was treated fairly back then. And I will never forget the fact that Richard could have been opportunistic. Richard could have used the same line that so many of these other stores did that, oh, there's a run on AR-15s or there's a run on 5.56 ammunition. So the vendors are selling it to me for more, so I have to sell it to you for that. That was a lie. That was a lie that a lot of people used. And Richard never tried to do that. He could have gotten away with it because everybody else was using that same lie. But he never once used that lie. In fact, I remember seeing Richard selling AR-15s for $15, just like they normally would be priced for. And somebody else would say, man, I spent $40 on one. And Richard was like, they don't cost me that much. Nobody raised the price on me. You know, that was the thing about Richard. He was such an honest man that whether you agree with him or not about some of the things that he thought gun-wise or whatever, you at least knew you were being treated fairly. Folks, I hope you guys that were friends of Richard, family of Richard, that knew Richard and were touched by Richard while he was here with us, see this as the gifts that Richard gave us. I, for one, know how happy I am to have known Richard. I guess you could probably say it probably hasn't sunk in yet that my friend's never going to tear a gun down with me again and, you know, give me advice on anything or talk about old guns or, you know, whatever. Maybe it hasn't sunk in yet. But I can tell you I'm more happy for having known Richard and all the things that I got from Richard, honestly and genuinely from Richard. I know I will continue to come here at Gator Guns, and I know I'll continue to visit with John and Allison and Miss Donnie. But I also know and am realistic enough to realize that there are some of the things that I always look forward to that I may not have been conscious of at the time, to realize how much I value those things, like sitting right here talking to Richard. And those are things that I know that I will never experience again. As I said at the start of the show, you know, we've got buddies and we've got friends, and Richard was my buddy. And there are some things that Richard and I shared that I will never share with anybody else for the rest of my life. And it's a huge loss. It's a huge loss. I feel like there's so much that I wish I would have asked Richard. You know, there's other conversations I wish that I would have brought up. But while I'll always keep coming back here, this room will never be the same to me. This chair will never have the same personality sitting in it. That I always felt like it was an older brother or something like that. You know, what I took from Richard, I can assure you, is way more than he ever got from me. I feel like I was given a multitude of gifts, and I think most of the people that got to know Richard can probably tell you the same thing, because Richard was a very giving person, and sometimes you had to crack through and get to the good side of Richard before you got on his good side, to where you really actually realized how good of a man he was. But Richard was by far one of the guys that, from a firearms community standpoint, Second Amendment, concealed carry, USPSA, just anything like that, Richard was a big person in the community. And Richard was a huge influence to me and my show. And Richard will always be remembered by me and so many others. And I just, you know, this is a day and a time when I'm rarely at a loss for words, but it's a tough time right now. And I hope all of you out there can get past the way I feel that this is a bad thing. And you know, no one wants to celebrate somebody's death, so I think what we have to do is look at celebrating the life that he gave us and that he shared with us. And that's one of the things that I will definitely take from this. It's just that this room's never going to be the same to me, and I will forever miss my buddy. He was a special person.